Under the golden glow of chandeliers, the ballroom at Cedar Grove Estate pulsed with laughter, music, and the clinking of champagne glasses. Yet, in a quiet corner near the service entrance, 16-year-old Emily Carter sat alone in her wheelchair, her midnight blue dress pooling like shadows at her feet. The crowd flowed around her as if she were invisible. No smiles, no greetings, not even a passing nod. Then, breaking through the hum of the dried celebration, came a gentle voice. "Why are you sitting here all alone, sweetheart?" asked Grace Thompson, a catering server, balancing a silver tray. Her tone was soft, her eyes warm, so different from the polished indifference of the guests. Emily blinked, startled. No one had spoken to her all night. Grace didn't walk away. She lingered, her presence steady, as if she saw more than just a girl. In the shadows, bit by bit, Emily found herself talking about the nights she used to dance, about how choreography had been her dream before the accident that left her paralyzed from the waist down. Her voice trembled, but Grace listened without pity, only with quiet understanding. As the jazz band played in the distance, their conversation felt like a small light in a room full of glittering coldness. Grace's words, simple, sincere, didn't just acknowledge Emily, they reached into a place no one else had dared to touch that night. For the first time in months, Emily felt like more than a silent observer. She felt seen. The jazz band's melody shifted, floating through the air with the gentle sway of Moon River. In the far corner of the opulent ballroom, Emily Carter sat in her wheelchair, her hands folded nervously in her lap. She had told herself she wouldn't think about dancing tonight. Wouldn't think about the life she had before the accident. Yet the music was a whisper to the past, tugging at the memories she had tried to lock away. Grace Thompson, the catering server, who had been the only person to truly acknowledge her that evening, reappeared. She set her tray down on a nearby table and crouched slightly to meet Emily's eyes. There was no rush in her manner, no sense that she should be somewhere else. "You know," Grace began softly, "I used to dance too. Tap dancing. Back in Atlanta, church halls mostly, nothing fancy. Until I lost my left foot to diabetes." Emily's eyes widened. "You lost it?" Grace nodded, her voice calm, almost matter-of-fact. 5 years ago, my daughter cried. More than I did. But I told her, you don't need 2 legs to feel the beat. You just need one heart that still wants to move. Something in those words lodged deep inside Emily's chest. For months, she had believed dance was gone from her forever, because her legs no longer worked the way they used to. But here was a woman, missing a foot, still speaking of rhythm as if it lived in her bones. Grace tilted her head toward the band. "What do you say?" she asked. "To a seated waltz?" "No spotlight, no stage, just here, just us." Emily froze for a moment, her fingers gripping the armrest. Part of her wanted to refuse, to hide behind the safety of stillness. But another part, the one that remembered spinning under bright stage lights, ached to say yes. She nodded. Grace stepped closer, extending both hands. "May I?" Emily placed her hands in Grace's. They began to sway gently, following the slow, lilting rhythm of Moon River. Grace led with the ease of someone who understood movement beyond mechanics. Her step small and deliberate, Emily's upper body responding in perfect time. The wheelchair became part of the dance, gliding in a subtle arc as they circled each other. "See?" Grace murmured. "It's not about the legs. The rhythm's in your hands, your shoulders, your smile." Emily felt something loosen inside her. At first, her motions were tentative, but soon her shoulders lifted with the music, her arms extending more freely. The chandelier's light caught the shimmer of her dress as they moved in quiet harmony. In that moment, it didn't matter that one woman had a prosthetic foot and the other sat in a chair. What mattered was that the music carried them both, that the walls of the ballroom seemed to fade until it was just the two of them, bound by an unspoken understanding. As the final notes of Moon River drifted away, Emily realized her throat was tight, her eyes stinging. Grace gave her hands a gentle squeeze. "That wasn't about pity," Grace said softly. "That was a promise kept in a new way." Emily swallowed hard. "Thank you." Grace smiled, a spark in her eyes. "Don't thank me yet. The real dance is just getting started." Emily watched as Grace picked up her tray and walked back into the crowd, her steps carrying a faint sway in time with the music. The room returned to its swirl of conversation, laughter, and clinking glasses. But Emily no longer felt like an outsider pressed against the edges. She sat taller, her fingers tracing the faint rhythm that still hummed through her palms. For the first time since the accident, she could imagine moving again, not just across a dance floor, but back into her own life. The joy she thought she'd lost forever had been reignited, not in the grand gesture of a stage performance, but in the quiet rebellion of a corner dance shared between two women who refused to let the world decide their limits. In that stolen moment, Emily realized something that would stay with her for years. You don't stop dancing when life changes. You just learn a new way to hear the music. The night after the wedding, the memory of that quiet, stolen dance with Grace Thompson still warmed Emily Carter's thoughts. She could still feel the rhythm in her palms, the subtle sway of the wheelchair, as they'd moved together in their corner of the ballroom. But by the time she rolled into the dining hall for a private family dinner the next evening, that warmth was replaced by a sudden chill. It was a smaller room than the grand ballroom, polished wood, floral centerpieces, and the low murmur of conversation between board members and relatives. Her father, Robert Carter, sat beside her in his motorized chair, more alert than usual, which she took as a small victory. Across the table, Cynthia Reeves, her father's longtime personal assistant, leaned in close to a board member's wife, discussing company expansion plans as though Emily weren't even in the room. When the appetizers arrived, Emily immediately noticed something was wrong. The uniform was familiar, but the face was not. Grace was nowhere in sight. She waited until the server moved past her chair, then spoke quietly. "Excuse me. Is Grace working tonight?" The young man blinked, clearly startled that she had spoken. She's been reassigned to kitchen prep." Emily's brow furrowed. "Why?" He hesitated, then said, "Orders from management, I think." Her eyes slid down the table to where Cynthia now sipped her wine with the satisfaction of someone who had won a quiet battle. The knot in Emily's stomach tightened into something sharper. When the dinner ended, she didn't linger for polite conversation. Instead, she wheeled straight toward the service entrance behind the ballroom, ignoring the raised brows from both guests and staff. She pressed the service bell. A kitchen assistant opened the door, his expression curious. "I'm looking for Grace Thompson," she said firmly. He hesitated. "Break room. Second left." Emily followed the directions and soon found Grace sitting on a plastic chair, her shoes off, her prosthetic foot resting beside her. She was sipping tea from a paper cup, looking momentarily surprised before breaking into a smile. "Well, look who rolled in," Grace said warmly. "They reassigned you," Emily stated, her tone flat. Grace shrugged lightly. "Kitchen's quieter. They think I'll cause less of a distraction back here. This is because of me, isn't it?" Emily pressed. "It's not about blame, honey. It's about roles," Grace said, her voice gentle but edged with realism. "People like Cynthia don't like the lines blurred between staff and guests, especially not when it's the CEO's daughter dancing with a woman like me. You're not just staff to me," Emily said, her voice low. "You're the only person here who actually sees me." Grace bent forward to reattach her prosthetic. "That's kind of you, but kindness doesn't change policies. What matters is what you do next." Emily sat in silence for a long moment. "Can I do something to help?" "You've already done more than most ever would," Grace replied softly. They sat together for a few minutes, the hum of the industrial refrigerators filling the quiet. Before Emily left, she asked, "Will you meet me tomorrow morning on the garden terrace?" "I want to practice again." Grace hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be there, before anyone's watching." For the next week, they met in the soft golden light of early morning. Grace taught her to feel rhythm in her hands, to let her shoulders guide her movements, to claim space even from a seated position. The laughter that returned to Emily's voice each morning was something she thought she'd lost forever. And then, on the 8th morning, Grace didn't show. Emily waited an hour, then rolled to the kitchen entrance. The assistant who had first helped her looked uncomfortable when she asked. "She's not working today," he said. "She was let go." Emily's voice was tight. "Why?" "They said she violated conduct policy, got too close to a guest." Her stomach dropped. "You mean me?" He didn't answer. Emily didn't cry. She didn't even go back to her suite. Instead, she went directly to the Gry-First temporary Langley Holdings conference room set up in one of the resort's meeting spaces. Cynthia was inside, reviewing vendor reports. "I need to talk to you," Emily said sharply. "If it's about Grace," Cynthia began. "It is." Emily cut in. "You had no right." I followed procedure, Cynthia said coolly. Staff aren't permitted private engagements with guests, especially minors. She was teaching me to dance. She was overstepping, Cynthia replied, her tone clipped. We're trying to maintain an image here. Emily wheeled closer, her voice rising. What image? One where your CEO's daughter is paraded around like she's fine, while everyone ignores the fact that she's barely holding it. Together? Cynthia's expression shifted slightly. That's unfair. No, Emily said firmly. What's unfair is punishing someone for caring for reminding me. I'm still a person. Without another word, she spun her chair around and left. That night, in her father's suite, she sat by his side, the glow of the muted television flickering across his face. She reached for his hand. I'm going to find her, she whispered. And when I do, we're going to dance again, this time with the whole room watching. Her father's fingers twitched slightly, and Emily knew this wasn't just about dancing anymore. This was about standing up, for Grace, for herself, and for the belief that compassion should never be treated like a violation. That same evening, she opened her laptop. The letter she began to type wasn't addressed to Cynthia or resort management. It was addressed to the board of directors of Carter Holdings. She wrote about dignity. About the responsibility of a company that prided itself on leadership, to also lead with humanity. She spoke plainly about her own struggles, not just with her wheelchair, but with the silence that surrounded vulnerability in places built on image. And she told them about Grace, the woman who had shown her that rhythm could live anywhere, even when the world told you to sit still. By the time she finished, Emily's hands ached from typing. She printed the letter, folded it carefully, and delivered it to the family's legal advisor, Mr. Raymond Cole. You wrote this, he asked, glancing over the first few paragraphs. I lived it, she said. Raymond nodded slowly. You know this will make waves. I'm counting on it. The plan came together quietly, almost like a secret whispered between beats of a song. Ever since Cynthia Reeves had forced Grace Thompson out of the resort, Emily Carter had been turning over one idea in her mind, something bold enough to make the board of Carter Holdings see what she saw in Grace. Not just a server, not just a kind stranger, but a teacher, a leader, someone who could change lives if given the chance. It started with a small group of allies, Kevin, a young staff member who had been silent, clearing plates and refilling water glasses all week, and Raymond Cole, her father's long-trusted legal advisor. Kevin knew the back hallways, the spare equipment closets, and exactly which storage room still had a working spotlight. Raymond knew how to navigate the politics of the board, and more importantly, how to ensure they showed up to an informal gathering, without knowing too much in advance. Over the next several days, Emily and Kevin transformed a forgotten garden room into a small performance space. Ivy and string lights draped from the ceiling, a portable stage sat at the center, and speakers waited quietly in the corners. She even managed to get her father's caregiver to agree to bring him, wheelchair, and all on the night of the event. Finding Grace was the hardest part. Emily called half the local churches, asked after her at small cafes, and even bribed a cab driver for information. She finally found her in the back pew of a neighborhood church, humming along with the choir. When Grace turned and saw her, surprise softened into a quiet smile. I need one more dance, Emily said. But this time, the whole room will be watching. Grace hesitated. Emily, I don't work there anymore. You know what they'll say. I don't care what they say. I care about what they'll see. There was a long pause, then Grace nodded. All right, child. Let's give them something they'll never forget. The night arrived. Inside the garden room, a small audience gathered board members, a few trusted staff, and, at Emily's insistence, Cynthia herself, sitting stiffly in the back row. Kevin dimmed the lights, and a single spotlight warmed the center of the stage. Grace stepped out first. No catering uniform, no tray in hand, just a soft flowing blouse and black slacks, her posture tall and steady. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then Emily rolled forward from stage left, the spotlight widening to include her. The first notes of Moon River began slower than the usual arrangement, played on piano and strings. Grace extended her hands. Emily placed hers gently in them, and they began to move. It wasn't a traditional waltz. Grace's steps were slow and deliberate. Emily's upper body swayed in perfect time. When Grace tapped lightly on the stage, Emily echoed the beat by tapping the side of her wheelchair. They circled one another, one standing, one seated, yet in flawless sync. Halfway through the song, Grace spun Emily's chair in a small, graceful turn, a move so subtle it might have been missed, yet it transformed the moment entirely. Emily was no longer just a girl in a wheelchair. She was a dancer reclaiming the floor she'd been denied. When the final note faded, Grace bowed her head, kissing Emily's fingers with quiet reverence. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then Raymond rose to his feet, clapping. Others followed. Even some kitchen staff who had slipped in through the back cheered openly. One voice called out, "That's how you teach the world." Backstage, Emily's pulse still raced when Raymond entered with two board members. Mrs. Bennett and Mr. Trask, both known for their traditional views. Mrs. Bennett spoke first. "Miss Carter, that was extraordinary." Mr. Trask cleared his throat. "Miss Thompson, your suspension is lifted, effective immediately." Grace raised a hand politely. "With respect, sir, I won't be returning to serve shrimp cocktail." He blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Emily leaned forward in her chair. "We have a proposal." Raymond handed them a packet. Inside were plans for the still-moving project. A Carter Holdings-funded initiative offering adaptive arts classes, dance therapy, and mentorship for people with disabilities and the elderly, led by Grace Thompson herself. Mrs. Bennett looked up from the pages. "And you'd run this?" Grace nodded. "I've got rhythm, patience, and time. That's more than most." Silence stretched for a few seconds, then Mrs. Bennett said quietly, "I think it's overdue." "Seconded," said Mr. Trask. Later that night, Emily wheeled into her father's suite. He was awake, the television muted. She pulled out her phone and played the video of the performance. On the screen, she and Grace circled each other under the lights, the music swelling. "Proud of me, Dad?" she asked softly. His lips parted, voice rough but sure. "Always." Emily leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his hand. The battle wasn't over. There would be skeptics, obstacles, people who didn't understand. But tonight, the room had seen what she'd always known. That movement didn't belong to the able-bodied, it belonged to anyone, with a heart willing to keep the beat. And now, with the still-moving project set in motion, they were just getting started. The still-moving project began in the modest ballroom of the newly repurposed Carter Community Center, a space that, until a few months earlier, had been little more than a storage hall for unused banquet chairs and dusty stage lights. Now it gleamed with soft gold illumination. Its wooden floors welcoming both sneakers and wheelchair wheels, its walls decorated with murals of dancers in motion. From the very first week, the program drew a crowd that was as diverse as it was determined. Veterans with prosthetic limbs, teenagers navigating life in wheelchairs, elderly couples leaning on walkers, and even children who simply wanted to feel the joy of moving without judgment. Grace Thompson stood at the center of it all, her prosthetic foot visible beneath rolled-up jeans, leading each session with a rhythm that came as naturally to her as breathing. Emily Carter moved through the room alongside her, not as a figurehead, but as a partner. She encouraged shy participants, adjusted chairs, and joined in every exercise she could. The bond between the two women became the heartbeat of the program, their story inspiring not only the participants, but the volunteers who flocked to help. Kevin, the young resort staffer who had helped Emily stage the performance that started it all, now managed the sound system and logistics for each class. Local nurses volunteered there, time to ensure the space remained safe for those with medical needs. Even a former security guard from the resort showed up to DJ on weekends. Word spread quickly. Videos of the classes, showing elderly women laughing mid-spin, or a young boy learning to clap in rhythm for the first time circulated online, often tagged with captions like "number still moving" and "number movement for all." The media picked up the story, framing it as a powerful example of corporate funding meeting genuine community need. But as the project grew, so did scrutiny. One morning, Emily awoke to find her phone buzzing with notifications. An article from a regional business paper bore the headline, "Carter Heiress's Dance Program. Heartwarming Outreach or PR Stunt." The piece hinted that the still-moving project was less about helping the disabled and more about repairing Carter Holdings' public image after recent controversies. It questioned Grace's credentials, dismissing her as a former catering worker elevated for optics, and implied that Emily's leadership role came from her last name, rather than merit. By midday, 3 other outlets had picked up the story. A city council vote on a proposed grant for the project was delayed pending further review. One parent from the Houston satellite class pulled their child, citing concerns about the organization's motives. In the studio, Emily sat by the mirrored wall, her wheelchair angled toward the window. Grace found her there, the offending article open on her tablet. "They don't know you," Grace said simply. "They don't have to," Emily replied, her voice tight. "They just have to shape how others see us. If we lose trust, we lose everything." For the first time since the project began, the air between them felt heavy. The joy of the Ravelry movement, once effortless, seemed clouded by doubt. That night, Emily lay awake replaying every step that had brought them here, wondering if she had built something real or just something that looked real. The next morning, she wheeled into the community center early, finding Gloria, an 83-year old participant, already in the training room. Gloria was leading a small movement storytelling class, swaying her arms as she spoke about her first school dance during segregation, when no one would hold her hand. "My mama told me, dance with your shadow, girl. It's the only thing that'll never leave you," Gloria finished. Emily felt something loosen in her chest. After the class, she approached Gloria. "Do you think this matters? Really matters?" Gloria looked her straight in the eye. "Child, you could disappear tomorrow, and what you built would still move. That's how you know it's real. The floor don't care about headlines. The rhythm is louder than doubt." That afternoon, Emily made her decision. She called a press conference, not at a hotel, ballroom or corporate venue, but at the studio itself, surrounded by scuff marks, mirrors, and the framed quotes from participants that lined the walls. Reporters arrived, some skeptical, others curious. Grace stood beside her, arms folded but eyes steady. "I've read the articles," Emily began. "I understand the questions. I don't have a defense. I have a story, my own, and hundreds of others." She gestured to the projector behind her, which began playing clips. Raimi teaching a new student to clap to the beat. Gloria leading her class, a teenage boy laughing mid-spin as his mother wept nearby. "This isn't about redemption for me or my family name," Emily continued. "It's about recognition. Recognition of movement, of story, of being seen." The questions came quickly, sharp at first, but she answered each one with honesty. She acknowledged her privilege, her mistakes, and her fears. She invited every outlet present to visit the classes, speak with participants, and see for themselves, without curated photo ops. By the end of the week, the tone began to shift. Parents who had left brought their children back. The delayed grant vote passed unanimously. One of the original critical outlets ran a follow-up titled, "We asked if still moving was real. We forgot to ask the people it was made for." The floor had trembled, but it hadn't broken. And in that resilience, Emily found a deeper truth. The Still Moving project was no longer about her and Grace. It was about a community that would keep the rhythm alive, no matter who tried to silence it. The sting of the headlines hadn't faded, but Emily Carter knew she couldn't let the doubt fester. The Still Moving project had grown too far, touched too many lives, to be defined by whispers of PR stunt and optics. If the critics wanted answers, they weren't going to get a rehearsed statement or a polished corporate press release. They were going to get the truth. She decided the meeting would happen on her own ground. No grand hotel ballroom or boardroom table. The press conference would take place at the Carter Community Center. Studio, the heart of the program. The space itself told a story. Mirrors scuffed from months of use, wooden floors that bore the faint tracks of wheelchair wheels and tap shoes, and the walls lined with hand-painted murals of dancers, some in motion, some just standing tall. Word spread quickly. By the morning of the conference, the air inside the studio buzzed with the low murmur of reporters, photographers, and videographers setting up their gear. Some looked skeptical, others curious. Grace Thompson stood beside Emily near the back of the room, her arms folded loosely, her prosthetic foot visible under rolled-up jeans. Emily wheeled forward to the center of the floor, her position chosen deliberately, not behind a podium, not on a raised platform, but level with everyone else. "I've read the articles," she began, her voice steady but unvarnished. "I know the questions that have been asked. And I want to be clear, I'm not here to defend myself with spin. I'm here to tell you a story. My story. And the stories of the people who make this place matter." She gestured toward the projector screen mounted on the back wall. The lights dimmed, and a short reel began to play. It wasn't slick corporate footage, it was raw, handheld clips from crossed inside the classes. Raimi, the teenage volunteer, teaching a new student to find the beat with crasses. Claps. Gloria, 83 years old, leading her movement through storytelling class, swaying her arms as she recounted the first school dance she ever attended during segregation. A young boy in leg braces laughing mid-spin while his mother wept in the corner. This, Emily said when the reel ended, is the Still Moving project. Not a press release, not a marketing strategy, just people reclaiming movement in their own way. Some of them have been told their whole lives that dance, rhythm, and expression aren't for them. We're here to prove otherwise. The first questions from the press were sharp. One reporter asked bluntly, "How do you respond to claims that this program is simply image rehab for Carter Holdings?" Emily didn't flinch. "I won't pretend my family name hasn't opened doors. It has. But those doors didn't create this program, people did. Grace, who taught me to find rhythm again, after I thought I'd lost it forever. Volunteers like Kevin, who keep the lights on and the music playing. Participants like Gloria, who show up every week with stories and movement that inspire all of us. If anyone here thinks this is just PR, I invite you to stay after this conference. Talk to them, and see for yourself." Another question came, "Why host the press here, instead of in a neutral location?" Emily smiled faintly. "Because this isn't neutral work. This is lived work. I wanted you to see the mirrors, the floors, the faces. I wanted you to feel what it's like when the music starts, and people who were told to sit still their whole lives decide to move anyway." As the questions continued, Emily kept her answers grounded, never dodging, never resorting to buzzwords. She acknowledged her privilege openly, admitted to early mistakes in the Terrier project's rollout, and even spoke about moments when she doubted herself. But each answer circled back to the people the program served, not as a tactic, but because that was where the truth lived. When the formal Q&A ended, Emily did something no one expected. She invited the reporters to stay for the afternoon's adaptive rhythm class. Some hesitated, but a surprising number agreed, exchanging their notebooks for folding chairs along the wall. The music started, a slow, steady beat from the speakers. Grace led from the center, clapping a pattern, and participants followed in their own ways. Some tapped their feet, some moved their hands, some simply swayed. Emily moved through the room, greeting people by name, introducing them to reporters. She watched as skepticism gave way to engagement. Journalists leaning forward, asking questions of the dancers, smiling at small victories. By the end of the class, the energy in the room had shifted. Photographers lowered their cameras to join in the clapping. One reporter, who had been stone-faced at the start, was now laughing as a young girl in a wheelchair taught him her spin move. When the last song faded, Emily returned to the center of the floor. "This," she said softly, "is why we're still moving. Because the rhythm belongs to everyone, no exceptions." The coverage that followed in the days ahead was different. Articles highlighted personal stories from participants. Local television segments showed the reporters themselves trying the rhythm exercises. The delayed grant was approved unanimously, and donations ticked upward. Parents who had withdrawn their children brought them back, some with apologies. One of the most surprising follow-ups came from a columnist who had been among the harshest critics. His piece began, "I came to the Carter Community Center expecting to cover a PR stunt. I left with my palms sore from clapping, and my perspective changed. If this is a stunt, it's the most honest one I've ever seen." Emily didn't see the restored reputation as a personal victory. It was a win for the entire community. The doubts hadn't just been answered, they had been replaced by trust, earned step by step, beat by beat. As she locked up the studio that evening, Grace lingered by the door. "You did good today?" she said. Emily shook her head. "We did good. And tomorrow, we do it again." They walked out together into the cooling night, the faint echo of the day's rhythm still humming in the air, proof that truth, once spoken plainly and seen clearly, had the power to move more than just bodies. It could move hearts. What began as a small adaptive dance program in a converted community hall was now rippling far beyond Austin. Within a year, the Still Moving project had planted roots in Dallas, San Antonio, and Atlanta. Each new chapter carried its own flavor. Dallas embraced live jazz accompaniment, San Antonio blended Latin rhythms into classes, and Atlanta became a hub for youth mentorship through dance. Everywhere, the philosophy was the same. Movement belongs to everyone. By the time the first Still Moving National Summit was announced, excitement had spread through the network, like music through a crowd. The chosen venue was in Chicago, a restored train station turned community arts center, its cavernous halls once echoing with departures and arrivals. Now set to pulse with the sound of feet, wheels, claps, and laughter. On the opening day, over 400 participants from across the country filled the space. Children in leg braces raced between sessions. Veterans with service dogs swapped stories with seniors in scooters. A deaf dancer led a workshop on finding rhythm through vibration. The air was alive with the hum of shared purpose. When it came time for the keynote, Emily Carter and Grace Thompson stepped onto the floor. Together, not a stage, because the summit's design was deliberate. No raised platforms, no divisions between audience and presenter. Emily looked out at the sea of faces, each one carrying their own history, their own rhythm. There was a time, she began, her voice steady, when I thought broken meant finished. But I've learned that broken can also mean open. This movement began with a question. Why is she alone? And the answer has been all of you showing, every day, that movement isn't something you earn. It's something you own. Applause rolled through the room, not explosive but deep, resonating like a heartbeat. Grace added, we aren't here to perform for approval. We're here to remind ourselves, and each other, that no one gets to take our rhythm away. That afternoon, Emily was called backstage. Her father, Robert Carter, had arrived. Though his health had declined since his stroke, he insisted on making the trip. 2 caregivers helped him into the summit hall. When Emily reached him, his hand trembled slightly as he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. Inside was a gold wedding band, worn smooth over decades. Your mother used to tap this against the table whenever she was nervous, he said, his voice rough but sure. Said it reminded her of her father's beat. It's yours now. Emily held the ring carefully, the weight of it warm in her palm. Dad. She began, but he shook his head gently. You've made something worth carrying forward, he said. This, he gestured to the hall, filled with people, is our family's legacy now. That evening, the summit closed not with speeches, but with a shared dance. There were no spectators. Every person in the room moved in their own way, from the youngest child, spinning with abandon to Robert in his wheelchair, lightly tapping the armrest in time with the music. Emily and Grace joined the circle, hands linked, the wedding band cool against Emily's skin. It was more than a finale. It was a living symbol of everything. Still Moving stood for belonging, resilience, and the belief that rhythm lives in every single heart. The final night of the Still Moving National Summit was nothing like a performance, it was a shared heartbeat. There was no stage, no audience, no separation between those who dance and those who watch. The music began softly, then swelled, and one by one, every person in the hall joined the movement. Children spun beside veterans on crutches. Grandparents swayed in wheelchairs, and friends clasped hands to keep the rhythm alive. Emily Carter moved through the crowd with Grace Thompson by her side, feeling the pulse of something far greater than herself. This was no longer about reclaiming the dance floor she'd once lost. It was about transforming it into a place where everyone belonged. As the music faded, Emily smiled, breathless, and whispered to Grace, we rest. And then, we move again. The circle of dancers slowly stilled, but the energy in the room lingered. An unspoken promise that this was just the beginning. True legacy isn't about taking back what was once yours, it's about building something so open, so alive, that it belongs to everyone. When we create spaces where no one is left out, we don't just change lives, we change the world's rhythm. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever found your dance floor again after loss? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the stories that remind us to keep moving together.